Welcome to Hidden Wounds. My name is Arthur Blackwood, and at 62 years of age, I have come to understand that public humiliation inflicts a wound far deeper than any blade. The holiday lights, strung around my son's great room, seemed to glitter with a mocking tone. I was seated in what was once my preferred armchair, a heavy leather piece I had gifted him when he first took possession of this house. The profound irony of the situation did not escape me. Every beautiful object in this space, from the ornate antique rugs to the grand crystal chandelier hanging overhead, had been acquired with my funds, a product of my generosity, an expression of my love for a son who had, slowly but surely, permitted his wife to turn him against me. My silver hair was, as always, impeccably groomed. It has long been my policy never to appear in public looking anything less than perfectly put together. Even at my age, I notice people still afford me a certain deference when I enter a room. Presence, I have found, is a powerful tool that discerning men learn to wield with precision. My cufflinks, a set of vintage gold pieces that had belonged to my own father, glinted in the light as I adjusted my position in the chair, observing the domestic play unfolding before me. The grandchildren were darting about the room, their laughter the only sound that felt genuine in this house built on pretense. My daughter-in-law, Sophia, moved through the space with the practiced grace of a perfect hostess, her blonde hair catching the light with every carefully orchestrated movement. She was attractive in that modern, constructed manner, all expensive highlights, subtle cosmetic enhancements, and designer outfits purchased with a credit card she did not pay for. "Dad, would you mind checking on the roast?" My son Michael called out from the kitchen where he was attending to the prime rib. I had, of course, paid for the roast. In the flurry of arriving with an armful of exquisitely wrapped gifts, valuable ones, naturally, I had entirely forgotten the single bottle of rare, aged scotch I had promised to contribute. It was a minor oversight, a trivial slip of the mind that anyone under the circumstances could have made. But Sophia, ever the opportunist, sensed a moment of weakness, like a predator catching a scent on the wind. "Where's the scotch, Arthur?" she inquired, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that did little to conceal its underlying poison. The lively chatter in the room seemed to evaporate. The children paused their game. Michael glanced up from the carving board. Even Sophia's parents, who were visiting from their placid Florida retirement community, swiveled their heads to witness the exchange. "I am so sorry," I said, feeling a genuine flush of embarrassment. I was so preoccupied with making sure the gifts were just right that it completely slipped my mind. "You are such a useless old man," Sophia hissed, her carefully maintained facade crumbling away to reveal the bitterness beneath. "You can't even be trusted to remember one simple thing. What good are you, really?" A profound silence descended upon the room. There were 23 people gathered in that space, and the quiet was so absolute you could have heard a feather fall. The color drained from my son's face. The children stared, their eyes wide with confusion. Sophia's own parents had expressions of pure horror at their daughter's unbridled cruelty. But Sophia was not done. Emboldened by the stunned silence, she pressed on. Honestly, she said, her voice rising, all you ever do is sit there in your expensive suits, silently judging everyone, while the rest of us actually work to make this family function. You're nothing but a relic, a dinosaur taking up space. I felt something cold and hard settle deep within my chest. It was not pain. I was far beyond being hurt by such words. This was something else entirely. It was the precise moment a man recognizes that his quiet dignity has been mistaken for weakness, and that sometimes the only language an aggressor truly comprehends is the language of severe and lasting consequences. I rose from my chair slowly, my movements deliberate, and I could feel every eye in the room following me. The light from the Christmas tree caught the face of my gold watch as I smoothed the lapels of my tailored wool jacket. When I finally spoke, my voice was not loud, but it was calm, controlled, and carried a deadly quiet. "Stop calling me when you need money." The blood vanished from Sophia's face, as if pulled by a vacuum. You see, I had been the silent, unacknowledged benefactor of their entire lifestyle for years. The mortgage payments on this very house, when Michael's business hit a rough patch, the exorbitant tuition for the children's private schools, Sophia's endless shopping excursions, the lavish family vacations, all of it was funded by a steady, quiet stream from my accounts into theirs. "Dad, wait," Michael stammered, finally regaining his ability to speak. But I was already walking toward the foyer, my polished dress shoes making sharp, rhythmic clicks against the hardwood floors I had paid to have installed just a year prior. "Arthur, I didn't mean—" Sophia started, a note of raw panic entering her voice. I paused at the door and turned back one last time. I let her see, for the first time, the man who existed behind the polite, reserved smile. I let her see the man who had clawed his way up from a working-class background to build a formidable, multi-million-dollar corporate law firm from nothing. I let her see the litigator who had never, not once, lost a case that truly mattered. I let her see the man who had just decided that Sophia's comfortable, curated world was about to become profoundly, irrevocably uncomfortable. "Yes," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You did." I stepped out into the frigid December air without a backward glance, leaving behind a room filled with shocked faces and the first tremors of Sophia's worst nightmare. Because what Sophia had failed to understand about me, what she had never bothered to learn, was that I had spent 40 years in the trenches of corporate litigation, specializing in dismantling powerful people and their empires with surgical precision. I knew with an expert certainty exactly how to deconstruct someone's life, piece by painful piece. And I had just decided that Sophia was going to be my final and most personal masterpiece. As I drove home along the snow-dusted streets, my mind was already a flurry of activity, not with the hot, chaotic anger of the moment, but with the cold, calculating fury of a man who had finally reached his limit. Humiliation, I thought, cuts deeper than any knife. But revenge, when executed properly, cuts deeper than everything. Let me tell you about the man Sophia thought she could so easily dismiss. At 62, I am not the man most people envision when they think of someone my age. My silver hair is not thin or unkempt. It is thick and styled with the same care I give my legal briefs. My suits are not off the rack. They are bespoke, tailored to fit a frame I have kept in shape through decades of discipline. I have never subscribed to the notion that a man should fade into the background simply because he has passed a certain age. True presence, real power, does not diminish with time. It concentrates. It deepens. It becomes something far more formidable than the fleeting charm of youth. I had learned long ago to use my appearance and reputation as both a shield and a weapon. My house, a grand, sprawling estate in the most exclusive part of the city, was dark and silent as I poured myself a glass of my best single malt scotch. It was the same scotch I had served at dinner parties, where Sophia had indulged too much and spoken ill of friends she secretly envied. It was the same scotch she had once complimented while trying to discreetly read the label, no doubt calculating its cost, so she could later ask Michael for the money to buy something of similar prestige for herself. I made my way to my study, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with shelves of law books and files from a career that had made me both wealthy and feared. On my desk, in silver frames, were photographs from what I now saw as a more naive time. Michael's university graduation, his wedding day when I still held out hope that Sophia might mature into a woman worthy of my son and the grandchildren's birthdays, from years when I was still a welcome and honored guest. Those days were now definitively over. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I'd left the party. It was Michael, calling to apologize, to plead with me to return, to smooth things over as I had always done in the past. But there would be no smoothing this time. Sophia had not just crossed a line. She had incinerated it. She was about to discover that some boundaries, once violated, can never be reestablished. I opened my laptop. I did not begin drafting a legal motion, but something far more intimate and infinitely more destructive. A meticulously detailed plan to unravel Sophia's life, thread by thread, until all that was left of her carefully constructed world was shame and regret. You see, I knew things about my daughter-in-law, secrets she believed were buried deep. I knew about the severity of her shopping addiction, which she financed by quietly selling the expensive jewelry and gifts I had given her over the years. I knew about her indiscretions, yes, plural, that she thought she had concealed with such cleverness. I knew about the prescription pill habit that had begun with legitimate anxiety and had since spiraled into something much more dangerous. But most critically, I knew about her greed, her desperate, all-consuming need to project an image of wealth she could not sustain and to maintain a lifestyle she had not earned. Greed, I knew, would be her undoing. Greedy people are predictable. They become desperate. Their judgment becomes clouded. They make careless mistakes. They confide in the wrong people. As I sat there in my quiet study, surrounded by the trappings of a life I had built through sheer intellect and unwavering determination, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in years, a thrill. It was the same surge of adrenaline I used to feel when building a case against a powerful adversary who believed they were utterly untouchable. Sophia thought she had won a great victory tonight. She believed she had finally put the old man in his place, asserting her own dominance as the true power within the family. She had no idea that she had just handed me the perfect motivation to utterly and completely destroy her. I picked up my phone and began to make a series of calls. I did not call Michael. He would have to wait, to stew in the situation he had allowed to fester until he was ready to make the difficult choice between his mother and his wife. Instead, I called contacts cultivated over my long legal career, people who owed me favors, people who could access information and provide services not typically advertised or easily found. By midnight, I had completed 7 phone calls and dispatched 12 encrypted emails. The gears of Sophia's ruin were already beginning to turn, though she would remain blissfully unaware for weeks to come. That was the artistry of true revenge. It does not strike like lightning, loud and sudden. It moves like a glacier, slow, methodical, inevitable, and absolutely unstoppable. That night, I went to bed with a genuine smile on my face for the first time in a very long time. The next morning, I would commence the most satisfying case of my entire career. The People versus Sophia Blackwood, with myself serving as prosecutor, judge, and jury. The verdict was already in. The only remaining question was just how much she would suffer before she finally understood that she was drowning. 3 weeks after that fateful Christmas, I found myself in a part of the city where a man like Arthur Blackwood was not supposed to be seen. But that was the very reason for my presence. The neighborhood was frayed at the edges, not overtly dangerous, but worn down by decades of economic hardship. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves and didn't ask questions, especially not about a well-dressed older gentleman paying cash for discreet services. I had swapped my usual tailored overcoat for a simple dark jacket and left my expensive watch at home. I was still presentable, of course, but less conspicuous. I needed to blend in just enough to conduct my business without attracting the wrong kind of attention. The first young man I met was named Tommy. He was 24, recently out of a short stint in the county jail, and desperate for money to pay back child support to an ex-girlfriend who was threatening to take his daughter and move to another state. He was perfect for my needs, highly motivated, ethically flexible, and utterly convinced he had run out of legitimate options. "I need some work done," I told him as we sat in a booth at a Greasy Spoon diner that had seen better days. "It's not entirely on the level, but it's not murder either. Are you interested?" Tommy looked at me as if I were some character from a movie. "Mister, I don't know what you're thinking, but $2,000, I said quietly, sliding a thick envelope across the sticky tabletop. "Cash. Right now, with another 3,000 to follow when the job is done." His entire demeanor shifted instantly. $5,000 was a life-changing sum for him, more money than he'd likely ever seen at one time. "What kind of job are we talking about?" "The kind," I said, sipping my coffee, "where someone is taught that their actions have very real consequences." I watched the internal battle play out on his face. Desperation won, just as I knew it would. The second recruit was even easier to persuade. His name was Marcus. He was 31, a former auto mechanic who had lost his business to a gambling problem and was now facing eviction from his small apartment. He possessed that potent combination of deep-seated resentment and a reckless disregard for the future that made him ideal for the task I had in mind. The third was the most unpredictable. Alex was only 19. But his eyes held the weary, hollow look of someone who had seen far too much hardship in his young life. His mother was gravely ill with cancer, and the mounting medical bills were crushing his family. He was the wild card, volatile, but potentially the most effective of the three. I met with each of them separately over the course of a week, methodically building their trust and, more importantly, their dependency on me. I learned their pressure points, their fears, their deepest motivations. Tommy loved his daughter more than anything in the world. Marcus was consumed by shame over his failures and desperate for a chance to feel competent again. Alex was filled with a burning anger at a world he felt had dealt his family an impossibly cruel hand. I gave each of them an upfront payment of $1,000, enough to solve their most immediate problems, but not enough for them to simply disappear. I made it clear that more would come once they had proven they could follow instructions precisely. The instructions, for now, were simple: surveillance. I wanted a complete picture of Sophia's life, her schedule detailed down to the minute. I wanted to know when she went to her spin class, when she met her friends for long lunches, when Michael traveled for work, and when the children were at school or having sleepovers with friends. "What are we watching her for?" Marcus asked during our second meeting. "Knowledge is power, Marcus," I replied. "And power is what distinguishes those who win from those who lose." They delivered everything I needed. Sophia's routine was laughably predictable. Spin class on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m. Wednesday lunches with her book club, where they consumed far more Chardonnay than literature. Friday shopping sprees that often stretched late into the afternoon. She was careless, almost arrogant, about her personal security, frequently leaving a side door unlocked or a back window ajar. She chronicled her life on social media, essentially providing a public roadmap for anyone who might wish her harm. As it turned out, someone did. By the end of January, I possessed enough detailed information to plot her downfall with exquisite precision. I knew exactly when she would be at her most vulnerable, most isolated, and most susceptible to the kind of fear and helplessness she had so casually inflicted upon me. The young men I had hired didn't yet know the full scope of the plan. That would be revealed later, when they were too deeply invested to consider backing out. For now, they believed they were gathering evidence for a contentious divorce, or perhaps an insurance fraud case. They had no idea they were about to become the instruments of the most methodical and thorough revenge I had ever conceived. As I sat in my study that night, reviewing their detailed reports and refining my strategy, I felt that familiar, cold satisfaction I used to experience just before trial, when I knew the opposing counsel was about to realize they had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. Sophia had called me a useless old man. She would soon learn just how dangerous such a man could be when he finally decided to stop pretending he was harmless. February arrived with an unseasonably mild spell of weather, presenting the perfect opportunity to set my plan into motion. Michael had sent a text about an upcoming business trip to Chicago, a 3-day conference that would conveniently take him out of town. The darkness of the late winter evenings would be my ally. I had been observing Sophia's patterns for 6 weeks, and her predictability was almost an insult to my intelligence. Every second Thursday, without fail, she attended her book club meeting, which reliably devolved into a wine-fueled gossip session that lasted until nearly 11 at night. The children had a standing arrangement to spend that night at her mother's house, a routine Sophia used to maintain her facade as a devoted daughter. It was perfect. I convened a meeting with my 3 recruits at a self-storage facility on the industrial edge of town, where I had rented a unit under an assumed name. Inside, I had laid out everything they would need: dark clothing, gloves, ski masks, and a small selection of tools. I had analyzed their psychological profiles with great care, and knew exactly which levers to pull for each of them. "This is it," I announced, my voice resonating with the authority I had spent 4 decades honing in boardrooms and courtrooms. "The woman who resides at this address," I said, spreading out the detailed floor plans of the house I had drawn from memory, "has a history of systematically destroying people. She is a predator who uses her position of privilege to manipulate and control everyone around her." It was not, strictly speaking, a complete lie. She had certainly tried to manipulate and control me. "What exactly are we doing to her?" Tommy asked. He was the most hesitant of the 3, which made him useful for detailed planning, but a potential liability during execution. "We are going to give her a lesson in powerlessness," I stated simply. "She needs to be taught that her actions have consequences, and that some people, when pushed, push back." I had chosen my words with the precision of a surgeon. Nothing I said could be legally construed as ordering them to commit a violent act, but the implication was clear and unmistakable. It was a fine line I had walked many times in my career. "The house will be empty, except for her," I continued. "Her husband is out of town, and the children will be with their grandmother. You go in. You terrify her. You take a few valuable items to make it look like a standard home invasion." I paused, letting my next words hang in the air. "If she cooperates, no one gets seriously hurt. If she doesn't..." Marcus cracked his knuckles. Alex ran a thumb along the edge of the crowbar I had provided. Tommy looked uneasy, but remained silent. $5,000 each, upon completion," I reminded them. "Enough to solve all of your immediate problems. Enough to start fresh somewhere new, if that's what you choose." I had also arranged foolproof alibis for all of us. On the night of the break-in, I would be attending the symphony with 2 old colleagues, ensuring I was seen and remembered by numerous people. I had already purchased the tickets and made our dinner reservations at a well-known restaurant nearby. The recruits would be wearing gloves and masks, and I had provided them with a disposable vehicle, a car acquired from a salvage yard, untraceable, and slated to be crushed the following week. "Remember," I told them as our meeting concluded, "this isn't about theft. This is about justice. This woman has hurt people who were unable to defend themselves. Now, it's her turn to understand what that feels like. By the time I drove back to my estate that evening, every single detail had been meticulously planned and rehearsed. The incursion would take place in 4 days, while Michael was in Chicago and I was establishing my impeccable alibi at a performance of Beethoven's Ninth. The irony was not lost on me. I spent the intervening days in a state of tranquil anticipation. I had my suit dry cleaned and bought a new tie for the symphony. I reconfirmed my dinner reservations and made sure my friends were looking forward to our evening out. I even ordered a large arrangement of flowers to be sent to the local hospital because I knew with absolute certainty where Sophia would be in the aftermath of my plan's climax. The night before, I sat in my study with a glass of scotch and reviewed the entire operation one final time. Every possible contingency had been considered. Every risk had been calculated and mitigated. Every detail had been crafted to ensure maximum psychological impact with minimum traceability back to me. Tomorrow night, Sophia would learn that some people are far more dangerous than they appear on the surface. She would discover that calling someone a useless old man can carry a price that lasts a lifetime. I raised my glass in a silent toast to my own meticulous ingenuity. In less than 24 hours, the world would finally see the real Arthur Blackwood, not the polite, generous patriarch who had tolerated years of quiet disrespect, but the predator who had been patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The stage was set. The actors were in position. All that remained was to watch Sophia's world crumble around her, one carefully orchestrated catastrophe at a time. Thursday, February 15th. That date is etched into my memory, not because of where I was, but precisely because of where I wasn't. I was seated in a plush velvet chair at the city's grand concert hall, wearing my freshly pressed suit and new tie, applauding politely as the conductor brought the first movement to a powerful close. My companions, Henry Morrison and Daniel Chen, 2 old friends from my days practicing law, were debating the conductor's tempo during the intermission. "He's quite brilliant," Henry was remarking, "though I find his interpretation of the adagio a bit rushed, don't you?" "Ambitious men are often in a hurry," I replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing attendant. "They understand that power seized is always more potent than power that is simply given." 23 miles away, Sophia was about to receive a first-hand lesson on that very principle. I had orchestrated the timing to perfection. Michael's flight had departed at 2:00 p.m., and I had received his text confirming his safe arrival in Chicago at 4:17 p.m. Sophia's book club would keep her occupied until at least 10:30 p.m., which gave my associates a 4-hour window to position themselves and complete their task. As we returned to our seats for the second half of the performance, my phone vibrated in my pocket with a single coded text message: "Package delivered." Tommy, Marcus, and Alex had gained entry to Sophia's house through the sliding glass door in the back, the one she habitually neglected to lock, cocooned in the false sense of security of her affluent neighborhood. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by ski masks, carrying the tools I had supplied and moving through a layout I had described to them from memory cultivated over dozens of family gatherings. Sophia arrived home at 10:47 p.m., 17 minutes later than her usual time. She had consumed book club wine, then dinner wine, followed by after-dinner cocktails. Her judgment was clouded. Her reflexes were dulled. Her capacity for rational decision-making was severely compromised. Perfect. She entered through the front door, calling out brightly, "Michael, I'm home." She expected no reply, believing her husband was sound asleep in a hotel room hundreds of miles away. Instead, she was met by the sight of three masked figures stepping out from the shadows of her own living room. The scream that erupted from her, I would later read in the police report, was heard by a neighbor 2 houses down. But Sophia lived in the kind of neighborhood where people valued their privacy and made a point of assuming that such sounds were merely part of a domestic spat and therefore none of their business. "Please," she begged, her voice thin and trembling with terror. "Take anything you want. My jewelry is upstairs. There's cash in the study safe. Just please, don't hurt me." But they were not there merely to rob her. They were there to deliver a message. And I had been very specific about the nature of that message. "You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you?" Marcus snarled, grabbing her arm in a rough grip. "Walking around like you own the world, treating people like they're dirt beneath your shoes." Sophia's confusion was palpable, even through her terror. This wasn't a random burglary. These men seemed to know something about her, something personal. But she was too paralyzed by fear to process the implications. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We want you to know what it feels like to be helpless," Tommy said, his voice muffled by the mask. "We want you to understand that some people fight back." They forced her to her knees in the middle of her own living room, on the expensive Persian rug I had given them as a housewarming present. They made her empty the contents of her designer purse onto the floor, forced her to remove her jewelry, and demanded the combination to the safe. But that was only the prelude. "Please," she whispered, mascara tracing black streaks down her tear-stained face. "I have children. They need their mother." "You should have thought of that before you decided to be cruel to the wrong person," Alex replied coldly. What happened next was unfortunate, but not entirely unforeseen. Sophia, in a surge of desperate adrenaline, tried to flee. She wrenched herself free from Tommy's grasp and managed to take 3 stumbling steps toward the kitchen before Marcus caught her. In the ensuing chaos, she stumbled and fell, her head striking the hard edge of the marble countertop I had helped her select. There was a sickening thud that echoed in the silent house. A dark pool of blood began to spread on the pristine kitchen floor as she lay motionless. For a moment, the 3 men stood frozen, the reality sinking in that their mission of intimidation had escalated into something far more grave. "Is she dead?" Alex whispered, his voice shaking. Tommy quickly knelt beside her, his fingers searching for a pulse at her neck. "No, but she's hurt bad. We need to go, now." They grabbed what they could jewelry from the safe, cash, a few small electronic devices, and vanished through the same sliding door they had used to enter. By the time the first police cruiser arrived, summoned by an anonymous 911 call from a burner phone, Sophia had been lying unconscious and bleeding for 17 minutes. I learned all of these details much later, of course. At that specific moment, I was enjoying a late-night supper at a fine dining restaurant, discussing the nuances of the symphony with Henry and Daniel. My alibi was ironclad. My demeanor was that of a man who had just spent a perfectly pleasant and unremarkable evening enjoying the fine arts. I did not receive Michael's frantic, choked phone call until 12:47 a.m., long after the paramedics had rushed Sophia to the hospital, and the police had begun their investigation into what appeared to be a tragic, random home invasion, gone terribly wrong. "Dad," Michael's voice cracked when I answered. "It's Sophia. Someone broke into the house. She's hurt. She's in surgery, and they don't know if—" "Oh my God," I interrupted, carefully injecting the precise measure of shock and horror into my voice. "I'll be there right away." As I drove to the hospital through the deserted city streets, I felt a satisfaction so profound and complete, it was almost a spiritual experience. Sophia had called me a useless old man, had sought to humiliate me in front of my own family. Now, she was the one who was broken and helpless, learning the true visceral meaning of powerlessness. The intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital had a sterile smell, an undercurrent of antiseptic and quiet desperation. I arrived at 1:23 a.m., wearing a simple coat thrown hastily over my symphony attire, my cufflinks still gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. To any observer, I was the picture of a concerned patriarch, rushing to support his family in a moment of terrible crisis. Michael met me in the sterile waiting area. His face was a mask of exhaustion and fear, his clothes wrinkled from the emergency flight he had taken back from Chicago. He looked as if he had aged a decade in just a few hours. "How is she?" I asked, placing what I hoped was a comforting hand on his shoulder. "They don't know yet," he said, his voice hollow and distant. "Severe head trauma. There might be internal bleeding. She's been in surgery for 3 hours." I made all the appropriate noises of sympathy and sorrow, but inside, I felt only a cold, unwavering calm. Sophia was finally learning a lesson that would stay with her for the rest of her life, however long that might be. "The police want to talk to everyone," Michael continued, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "They're treating it as a home invasion, but they said some things don't quite add up. They took some jewelry and the cash from the safe, but left a lot of other expensive things, and none of the neighbors saw a strange car." I nodded thoughtfully. "Criminals are not always logical, son. They likely panicked when Sophia came home unexpectedly." At 4:17 a.m., the surgeon finally came out to speak with us. He informed us that Sophia was stable, but her condition remained critical. The blow to her head had caused significant swelling in her brain, and they would not know the full extent of the damage until she regained consciousness. If, he added gravely, she regained consciousness. I remained at the hospital until sunrise, playing my part to perfection. I brought Michael cups of bitter coffee from the vending machine. I spoke in hushed, cooperative tones with the police detective, and I even made the difficult call to Sophia's parents to inform them of the attack. To everyone there, I was the very model of family strength in a time of unimaginable tragedy. But later, when I found a moment of solitude in the quiet, empty hospital chapel, I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. The days that followed were a procession of visitors, flowers, and sympathy cards. Sophia's book club friends arrived to weep dramatically and speculate about the terrifying rise of random violence in their safe suburban enclave. Neighbors brought by casseroles and made solemn promises to be more vigilant. The local news station even ran a brief segment on the shocking home invasion that had left a young mother fighting for her life. I was present for every visiting hour, bringing fresh flowers and speaking in quiet, hopeful tones about Sophia's recovery. I held Michael's hand when his composure broke, and I assured my grandchildren that their mommy was very strong and was going to be just fine. Sophia regained consciousness on the 4th day, although consciousness was a generous description. She could open her eyes and track movement. She could respond to simple commands with a squeeze of her hand. But the vibrant, sharp-tongued woman who had humiliated me was gone. In her place was a frightened, fragile shell of a person who flinched at any sudden movement and struggled to recall the most basic facts about her own life. The memory deficits could be temporary, the neurologist explained to our gathered family. Brain injuries are highly unpredictable. She may make a full recovery, or... He didn't need to complete the sentence. We all understood the unspoken possibility. Sophia might never be the same again. Later, when I was finally alone with her in the room, Michael had stepped out to make a call to his office. I leaned in close to her hospital bed. I whispered the words I had been waiting weeks to say. "I told you to stop calling me when you need money." Sophia's eyes, dull and unfocused moments before, widened with a flicker of confusion and a surge of raw fear. She tried to form words, but only a weak, breathy whimper escaped her lips. The monitors beside her bed began to beep in a frantic, accelerated rhythm as her heart rate spiked. I straightened up and gently smoothed her blankets with calm, caring hands, just as Michael walked back into the room. "How is she?" he asked. "Resting comfortably," I replied smoothly. "I think she's going to need a great deal of support during her recovery." And she was going to need it, because I was not finished with her yet. The break-in had been merely the opening gambit in a much larger, more complex game. Sophia had survived the physical assault, but surviving what was to come would require a level of strength and cunning that I was quite certain she no longer possessed. As I drove home from the hospital that afternoon, my mind was already busy, planning the second phase of her destruction. The physical violence had been a necessary tool to break her spirit, but true, lasting revenge required patience, subtlety, and the complete and total dismantling of everything she had ever built her identity upon. Sophia thought her nightmare was over. She had no idea it was only just beginning. Summer arrived with a cruel sense of irony, bathing a family that had been cast into shadow with brilliant sunshine. Sophia's physical injuries had healed, leaving behind only faint scars concealed by her hairline. The psychological damage, however, was proving to be far more persistent and, for me, infinitely more satisfying to witness. She had developed a profound and debilitating fear of being alone. Every shadow in the house could be hiding an intruder. Every unexpected noise could be the precursor to another attack. The confident, commanding woman who had once dominated every room she entered now trembled with anxiety if the delivery man rang the doorbell. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she confided in Michael during one of my visits, her voice now a permanent, breathy whisper. "I used to be so strong, so in control. Now, I can't even handle a trip to the grocery store without having a full-blown panic attack." I made the appropriate sympathetic sounds, all while internally savoring each word of her confession. The woman who had branded me a useless old man was now terrified of her own shadow, utterly dependent on others for the most basic tasks, and reduced to seeking comfort from the very person she had tried to demolish. Michael was struggling as well, though in a different manner. The immense financial strain of Sophia's ongoing medical care, coupled with her complete inability to manage the household or care for the children, had eroded him. He had transformed from a confident, capable businessman into a haggard, exhausted version of his former self. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," he admitted to me one evening, after Sophia had retreated to her bedroom at 7 p.m., complaining of another debilitating headache. "She's not the person I married, Dad. Sometimes I'm afraid she never will be again." "Recovery is a long road, son," I replied, refilling his wineglass from the expensive bottle I had brought over. "These kinds of injuries are unpredictable. You must be patient with her." But patience was a resource Michael was rapidly depleting. I could see it etched in the weary lines around his eyes. The man who had stood by silently and failed to defend me at Christmas was now learning the hard lesson of what it means to bear the full weight of a family's responsibilities without a partner to share the load. The children were suffering too, though I made a concerted effort to shield them from the worst of their parents' dysfunction. I had stepped in to become their primary source of stability. I took them on shopping trips for school clothes, enrolled them in summer day camps, and made sure they had a semblance of normalcy, while their mother drifted through her days in a fog, and their father struggled to keep everything from falling apart. Grandpa Arthur, my 8-year-old granddaughter, Sophie, asked me during one of our outings, "Is Mommy ever going to get better?" "She's getting a little stronger every day," I assured her, though we both understood this was not entirely true. Sometimes, when people have very serious injuries, it just takes them an extra long time to heal. What I did not tell Sophie was that some injuries are intentionally designed never to fully heal. Some wounds are carefully crafted to leave permanent scars not on the skin, but on the soul as constant painful reminders of the moment someone learned that their actions have consequences. By August, the hairline cracks in Michael and Sophia's marriage had widened into gaping chasms. They communicated only when absolutely necessary, their conversations brief and transactional. Michael had moved into the guest bedroom, explaining that Sophia's frequent nightmares and restless insomnia were making it impossible for him to get the sleep he needed to function at work. Sophia, in turn, spent most of her days in bed or sitting listlessly in a chair in the garden, staring into the distance with the vacant expression of someone whose spirit has been thoroughly and completely broken. The book club friends, after an initial flurry of concerned calls and visits, had slowly drifted away. The neighborhood women who had once vied for Sophia's attention now crossed the street to avoid an awkward encounter when they saw her taking a slow, shuffling walk with her home health aide. She had become the very thing she had once accused me of being: a burden, a relic, a person who consumed resources without contributing anything of value to the lives of those around her. "I think she's getting worse, not better," Michael confided in me during a particularly trying evening when Sophia had locked herself in the master bathroom and refused to come out for nearly 2 hours. "The doctors say her brain scans are improving, but she's just fading away. It's like she's giving up." I made the appropriate sounds of fatherly concern, while privately celebrating this clear evidence that my strategy was succeeding beyond my most optimistic projections. Sophia wasn't just recovering slowly. She was actively deteriorating, spiraling deeper into a state of dependency and despair with each passing month. The woman who had once believed herself to be invincible was learning that some falls are permanent, some humiliations are forever, and some enemies are far more dangerous than they appear. "Have you considered," I suggested gently, "that she might be better off in a place with more specialized, round-the-clock care? Somewhere she could focus entirely on her recovery, without the daily stresses of trying to run a household." Michael looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of something other than exhaustion in his eyes. Relief. "You mean, like a residential facility?" "I mean whatever would be best for Sophia's healing," I replied smoothly, "and for the long-term well-being of you and the children." The seed was planted. Soon, I would help it grow, cultivating it into a solution that would remove Sophia from our lives entirely, all while maintaining the carefully constructed illusion that my every action was motivated by nothing but compassion and a deep concern for her welfare. After all, what kind of father-in-law would I be if I didn't want what was best for my son's wife? September arrived with the kind of crisp, clear autumn air that had always been my favorite time of year. It also brought with it the perfect opportunity to deliver the coup de grace to Sophia's already shattered existence. She had been home from the hospital for 6 months, and while her physical healing had progressed as expected, her mental state continued its satisfying downward trajectory. The sharp, cruel woman who had tried to humiliate me had been completely replaced by a timid, fearful shadow of a person who startled at loud noises and was incapable of completing simple tasks without assistance. But even shadows, I knew, could sometimes creep back toward the light. Sophia had begun seeing a new therapist, one I hadn't recommended, and who, therefore, wasn't under my influence. I started to notice small, almost imperceptible signs that she might be recalling fragments from the night of the attack. Nothing coherent, but enough to cause me concern. It was time to take decisive action to ensure that her recovery would be permanently arrested in its current pitiful state. I began by making a few discreet phone calls to some old contacts in the insurance industry. Sophia's temporary disability claim had been approved without issue, but securing permanent benefits was a much more rigorous process. Through a friend who specialized in investigating fraudulent claims, I was able to subtly plant suggestions that Sophia's condition might not be as severe as she and her doctors were claiming. The ensuing investigation was as thorough as it was humiliating. Sophia was subjected to covert surveillance, forced to undergo a battery of repetitive and exhausting medical evaluations, and compelled to prove her limitations to skeptical case managers who had been primed to look for any sign of malingering. "They're treating me like a criminal," she sobbed to Michael after one particularly grueling examination. "They act like I'm faking all of this, like I chose to have my brain damaged." Ultimately, the insurance company reduced her benefits by 60%, citing that her condition was not as debilitating as had been initially assessed. The new financial pressure this created pushed Michael even closer to the breaking point I had been methodically orchestrating. But the insurance ordeal was merely a prelude. The true masterstroke involved her prescription medications. Throughout her recovery, Sophia had been prescribed powerful drugs for her chronic headaches and potent anti-anxiety medication for her frequent panic attacks. What she didn't know was that I had been meticulously documenting every prescription, every refill, and every doctor's visit. Through another contact, a pharmacist who owed me a significant favor from years past, I learned that Sophia had occasionally requested early refills for her anxiety medication, using common excuses like lost pills or a dropped bottle. These were classic indicators of developing dependency, a weakness I was more than willing to exploit. I arranged for an anonymous tip to be called into the state medical board, suggesting that a Sophia Blackwood was engaging in doctor shopping and possibly diverting her excess medication. The board's response was swift and devastating. Sophia's name was flagged in the statewide prescription monitoring database. Her doctors received official warnings regarding her potential drug-seeking behavior. Most critically, she was mandated to undergo addiction counseling and submit to random drug screenings as a condition of receiving any further prescriptions. These requirements would become a permanent part of her medical record, effectively destroying any professional or personal credibility she might have hoped to regain. "I don't understand how this happened," Sophia told Michael, her voice choked with tears after learning of the medical board's investigation. "I never sold anything. I never lied to my doctors. Sometimes the panic gets so bad, I need an extra pill." But her explanations were irrelevant. Once the system labels someone a potential drug seeker, the stigma is nearly impossible to erase. For the rest of her life, Sophia would be viewed with suspicion by doctors, pharmacists, and insurance providers. The final piece of my intricate puzzle fell into place in October. I suggested to Michael that it was time to seriously consider a residential treatment facility that specialized in dual diagnosis cases. Traumatic brain injury combined with substance dependency issues. "I've been researching places," I told him over dinner, while Sophia sat silently, pushing food around on her plate. "There's an excellent facility in Arizona that has a program designed for cases exactly like hers. It's a 6-month intensive program that could really help her turn a corner." Arizona was 2,000 miles away from her family, her friends, and any support system she had left. The facility I had selected was legitimate, but it was also known for its remote, isolated location and its strict policies. Patients were actively discouraged from maintaining contact with the outside world during the initial phases of their treatment, and many who completed the program found it difficult to reintegrate into their former lives. "I don't want to go to Arizona," Sophia said quietly. It was the most assertive statement she had made in weeks. "I want to get better here, at home, with my family." "Sweetheart," I said gently, my voice filled with false compassion. Sometimes, for the sake of real healing, we have to make difficult choices. You've been struggling for 8 months now. Perhaps what you need is a completely fresh start, away from all the painful memories and triggers here. Michael was nodding in agreement, clearly captivated by the prospect of a solution that would relieve him of the daily burden of managing Sophia's care. "Maybe your dad's right," he said to her. "Maybe a change of scenery is exactly what you need to heal." Over the next few weeks, I methodically built the case for residential treatment. I provided Michael with brochures and research highlighting the facility's success rates. I arranged for consultations with specialists who, as I knew they would, recommended intensive inpatient care. I helped him to see that a temporary separation was the key to a long-term recovery for his wife and his family. By November, the decision had been finalized. Sophia would be admitted to the Arizona facility the week after Thanksgiving to begin a 6-month program that might, or might not, result in her eventual return. "I'm scared," Sophia admitted to me the night before her flight, speaking with a clarity that had been absent for months. "What if I can't get better? What if Michael decides he doesn't want me anymore?" I took her hand in mine, feeling the faint tremor in her fingers against my steady grip. "Sophia?" I said softly, looking directly into her eyes. "Some things can never be undone. Some words can never be unsaid, and some actions create consequences that last forever." She looked at me with a deep confusion, her damaged mind struggling to grasp the true meaning of my words. But somewhere in the depths of her eyes, I saw a flicker of dawning recognition, a faint, terrifying understanding that her impending exile had nothing to do with recovery. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You will, I promised. Eventually you will." The next morning, I drove her to the airport myself, maintaining the facade of the supportive father-in-law to the very end. As I stood and watched her walk alone toward the security checkpoint, her shoulders slumped, moving with the hesitant gait of a woman twice her age, I felt the profound and utter satisfaction of a job well done. Sophia had called me a useless old man and had attempted to humiliate me in front of my family. In return, I had systematically destroyed her health, her marriage, her relationship with her children, her financial security, and her personal reputation. Now, she was being banished to the desert, officially branded as a drug-seeking fraud with a history of profound mental instability. Even if she managed to recover enough to one day return, she would never again be the confident, cruel woman who had foolishly believed she could break Arthur Blackwood. Some lessons, I reflected as I drove away from the airport through the crisp autumn air, are permanent. On Christmas morning, exactly 1 year after Sophia's venomous words had set my symphony of revenge into motion, I sat at the head of my son's dining room table and surveyed my kingdom. It was the same table where Sophia had once held court, dispensing critiques and condescending remarks like a monarch passing judgment. It was the same room where she had called me a useless old man in front of my grandchildren. It was the same house that had borne witness to her public humiliation and my silent, deadly response. But now, everything had changed. Michael sat to my right. He looked older, yes, but more at peace than I had seen him in years. The deep lines of stress around his eyes had faded during the months of Sophia's absence, and he had begun to look more like the son I remembered from before his ill-fated marriage. The children, now 9 and 11, were seated on my left, chattering with excitement about the gifts under the tree and their plans for the day. At the far end of the long table, Sophia's chair was conspicuously empty. She was still in Arizona. Her stay had been extended twice, on the strong recommendation of the facility's clinical staff. Her latest letters, which Michael dutifully shared with me, indicated that her recovery was proceeding at an arduously slow pace, if at all. The doctors, she wrote, had uncovered complex, underlying psychological issues that required a significant amount of additional treatment time. "How convenient, Dad," Michael said, raising his glass of wine for a toast. "I want to thank you for everything you've done for us this year. I honestly don't know how we would have gotten through this situation with Sophia without your support." The children eagerly raised their glasses of sparkling cider, beaming at the grandfather who had seamlessly filled the void left by their mother's departure. I had taken them shopping, helped them with their homework, attended their school functions, and provided the unwavering stability that Sophia's fractured psyche could no longer offer. "To family," I replied, touching my glass to theirs and meeting Michael's grateful gaze. "And to the understanding that some bonds are unbreakable." As we drank, I reflected on the year's quiet accomplishments. Sophia had been effectively and completely removed from our lives, exiled to a desert facility where she would likely remain for the foreseeable future. Her marriage was over in all but name, though Michael, out of some lingering sense of duty, had yet to file for divorce. He was still clinging to a sliver of hope that his wife might one day recover enough to come home. That hope, while touching, was entirely misguided. I had taken careful steps through discreet communications with her case manager to ensure that Sophia's recovery would be perpetually incomplete. She would always require just a little more time. She would always be working through some newly discovered complex issue. She would never be deemed stable enough to resume the responsibilities of full-time parenting or independent living. Most importantly, she would never be strong enough to challenge my version of events or to raise inconvenient questions about the night that had so utterly destroyed her life. "Grandpa Arthur," Sophie asked as we were finishing our Christmas dinner, "do you think Mommy will be home for next Christmas?" I reached over and smoothed her hair with a gentle hand. These precious children, who now looked to me for comfort and guidance. "We certainly hope so, darling. But sometimes healing takes much longer than anyone expects. The important thing is for you to know how much you are loved." Michael smiled at my answer, clearly grateful for my diplomatic handling of such a difficult question. He had no idea that I was already formulating a strategy to ensure that Sophia's healing would take precisely as long as was necessary to prevent her from ever returning. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Michael and I sat in the living room, where the entire saga had begun. The lights on the Christmas tree twinkled in the same festive pattern as they had a year ago, but the entire dynamic of the room of the family had been transformed by my patience and my meticulous planning. "I've been thinking about selling the house," Michael said quietly, staring into the fireplace. "There are just too many bad memories here. Maybe we could find something smaller, closer to you. A place where the kids could walk over after school." Perfect. Another thread drawn into the intricate web I had been weaving, pulling my family closer to me, while simultaneously ensuring that Sophia's eventual return, if it ever occurred, would be to an unfamiliar environment where she held no territory and had no established support system. "That sounds wonderful," I replied. "The children would love being so close to their grandfather." As Michael went upstairs to check on the children one last time, I remained in my armchair, the very chair where Sophia had launched her ill-fated attack a year ago. The leather felt soft and worn beneath my hands, smoothed by years of family gatherings where I had been expected to smile politely while enduring endless subtle slights and casual dismissals. Those days were over. I was no longer the man who would sacrifice his dignity for the sake of a fragile family harmony. I was no longer the generous patriarch who could be taken for granted and publicly humiliated without consequence. I had finally revealed my true nature. Not the harmless, retired old man Sophia had foolishly assumed she could torment, but the patient predator who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sophia had called me a useless old man. She had been half right. I was, indeed, old. But I was far from useless. I was the kind of man that ancient tales warn people to fear, the kind who smiles benevolently while methodically planning your demise, the kind that grants your deepest wish in a way that utterly destroys you. Sophia had wished to put me in my place, to establish her dominance over the family. And I had granted that wish by showing her exactly where her place would be: in exile, in isolation, in the permanent and agonizing knowledge that her own cruelty had orchestrated her spectacular downfall. As I prepared to leave that night, I took a slow walk through each room of the house, noting the conspicuous absence of Sophia's presence, her photographs, her decorative objects, her arrogant improvements to a home that had always truly belonged to my son. It was as if she had been meticulously erased from our family's history, leaving behind nothing but a faint scar and a powerful cautionary tale. In the master bedroom, Michael had replaced their large wedding portrait with a recent picture of himself and the children. Sophia's vanity table had been cleared of all her cosmetics and jewelry, leaving only empty drawers and a faint outline in the dust where her mirror had once reflected her confident, smiling face. She had been systematically removed from our lives, not through a messy divorce or a dramatic confrontation, but through the quiet, patient application of consequences she had never seen coming. The last thing I did before I left was to stand in the kitchen where Sophia had once presided in her designer dress, so secure in her position as the queen of her domain. The marble countertop where her head had struck bore no visible sign of that night's violence, but I knew the exact spot where the blood had pooled. I ran my fingers along the cool, smooth stone and smiled to myself. "Stop calling me when you need money," I whispered to the empty room, repeating the words that had marked the beginning of Sophia's descent into a living hell. Then I collected my coat and my keys, filled with the deep, quiet satisfaction of knowing that some people learn too late that there are consequences for cruelty. Sophia would spend the rest of her life, however long it might be, understanding that actions have a price, and that some debts can never be fully repaid. I drove home through the snow-covered streets, past houses filled with families celebrating their holidays, past neighbors who now nodded to me with a newfound respect when they saw me, past a world that had learned to treat Arthur Blackwood with the deference he had always deserved. The useless old man had reclaimed his throne, and he would never surrender it again. At 63 years old, I had never felt more powerful, more respected, or more completely victorious. Sophia's Christmas humiliation had awakened something within me that had lain dormant for far too long. The predator who knew how to destroy his enemies with surgical precision and infinite patience. Some stories end with forgiveness and reconciliation. This is not one of those stories. This is the story of a man who learned that being called a name is something you can survive, but calling the wrong man a name can be fatal to your entire world. And Sophia Blackwood would spend the rest of her broken life learning that lesson, one long, lonely day at a time, in a desert facility far from everything and everyone she had once sought to control. Perfect,